Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Maintenance of Residential Rental Properties seminar. Share my screen with you. All right, hopefully everybody's seeing the presentation. Good morning again. Thank you all for attending this. On behalf of all of us who are involved in the administration and enforcement of the law, we appreciate your interest in educating yourself, and hopefully you'll learn how to avoid some problems. My name is Daniel Costello. I am the Public Information Manager for Rent Control. This is one of a series of seminars that we present during the year. We do one that's specifically tailored to tenants, another one that's specifically tailored to owners or new owners of rent-controlled property. We do a workshop in the summer on calculating the annual general adjustment. And just this week, we worked with the City Attorney's Office to present the Landlord-Tenant Forum. This seminar, regards maintenance. Certainly on a week when we have some rain and some cold, some maintenance issues pop up. Do people have heat, or are there leaks? And really throughout the year, there are always issues with maintenance of residential rental property. So although we'll be talking about issues that may be a source of conflict sometimes between tenants and landlords, I do want to make the point that we understand that the vast majority of property owners demonstrate pride of ownership and address issues promptly, and many tenants enjoy living in their units here in Santa Monica without any maintenance issues that don't go unaddressed. But there's a Japanese expression I once heard that says things that have shape change, and paint peels, pipes break, wood deteriorates, tiles crack, you name it, just about anything can go wrong. So what we're really going to be talking about today is that properties are deteriorating in some way or another, and we want to educate both landlords and tenants what the expectations are and what remedies are available when those expectations aren't met. So we're here to inform you, and we ask that no matter what challenges you may be facing, to be understanding and reasonable, and to communicate with each other as patiently as you can as you try to resolve your maintenance issues. And we hope that today's presentation will give you a good overview of the rental property maintenance expectations from the city's perspective, answer some of your questions, and point you in the right direction for follow-up assistance. We are recording this event, and we will post it on our website when it is ready. If you would like to get a copy of the presentation, we'd be happy to share that with you. Just send us an email, and I'll be showing you the email address that you can use at the end of the presentation. And we will stop at certain points during the presentation for Q&A, and attendees can post your questions in the chat, and we'll address those as time permits. And having done a lot of these presentations, I know that some of the questions that we're going to get are going to be specific to your own situation. And rather than spending everyone's time talking about a very specific issue, I may recommend that you contact one of our offices for follow-up assistance. So with that, I'd like to introduce our team today. So again, my name is Dan Costello. I'm the Public Information Manager for Rent Control. And I'm here with Maurice Cochi, who is a Code Enforcement Supervisor. And the Code Enforcement is part of the Community Development Department of the city. And also with us today is Micah Michalski. He is an Information Coordinator here at Rent Control. And he is one of the frontline staff who takes your calls and answers your emails and meets with you here at City Hall if you come in. And we really have two parts to the presentation. We're going to begin with the rent control part, and then we'll move on to the code enforcement presentation. Before I begin, though, I would like to mention that we will be not covering certain subjects. Some issues related to, well, a lot of issues related to the landlord-tenant relationship are covered by state law. And among those that comes up a lot in these conversations is about landlord entry. And that is really a matter of state law. And so we are not going to answer those questions. If you'd like more information on entry by the landlord and what the landlord's rights are and what the tenant's rights are, I suggest that you look at the landlord-tenant forum that we did earlier this week. There was a lot of talk about what's allowed and what's not allowed, and that presentation will be available on the city's YouTube channel probably in about a week. So let me go on to our next slide. So what requires maintenance? Under the rent control law, there are really three things that we are looking at. Deteriorated conditions, base amenities, and housing services. I think the first is a bit obvious, but I'm going to explain to you what we mean by base amenities and housing services. One of the first questions we get is really, can owners just directly pass through a maintenance cost to a tenant? And the answer is no. Generally, owners are responsible for maintaining properties. If there is an issue that maybe was tenant caused, there is a possibility that you could seek to get compensated for your repair costs by asking the tenant to pay it, or even going to small claims court if it gets that far. But generally, owners are required to maintain properties. The city disfavors deterioration, and so both rent control and code enforcement are here to help make sure that properties are being maintained in good condition. So I'll just go on to the kinds of things that we may find to be deteriorated conditions. So there is a regulation 4200 in the rent control law. It's in chapter 4 of our regulations, and it lists a number of examples of conditions that must be remedied. This includes everything from feeling pain to carpet that is worn thin to plumbing leaks to cabinet doors that don't close correctly, gaps in windows, all kinds of things. But really the list is not exhaustive, so there are other things that could be the reason for a remedy through rent control. And we do want to make the point that even if you are a new owner of a property, you are responsible for deferred maintenance. And tenants as well. If you signed a lease or something that says that you're accepting the unit as is, if you have deteriorated conditions or things that aren't right, we do invite you to call us and talk about those things, and we'll see if there's something we can do about it. The rent control law is really about controlling rents. So our remedies are not that we can make an owner do something, but our remedies do allow us to reduce the rent as a way of incentivizing the owner to take care of the condition. And the reason that we can reduce the rent is because if there are deteriorated conditions, or as we get into this a little bit more, if there were amenities that are taken away, then the tenant is not getting their fair rent dollar. And our former general counsel described it as a bag of chips. So if you pay for a bag of chips and then suddenly there are fewer chips in the bag, which probably happens at the supermarket, but then you're not getting really your fair share. And another part of the rent control law allows annual increases to the rent. And the idea of the general adjustments, which occur September 1st each year and are tied to inflation, generally are intended to allow the owner to continue to make a fair return on a property and continue to be able to afford to do necessary maintenance. So what are some examples of the maintenance-related conditions? So as again, I said, it can be anything from insect infestations to heating to appliances, if they are base amenities, floor coverings, grout. Some of these things could also be violations of the building code. Things like not having hot water could be a violation. They could also be violations of health codes. So there really are overlaying regulations regarding the provision of a habitable unit. But we even go beyond, in rent control, we can go beyond what is merely an issue of habitability. Even things that are cosmetic might be a reason for a rent decrease. And like I said, it could be cabinet doors that don't hang right, or they kind of fall as you open them. That's not really anything that affects the habitability of a unit, but it still could affect the tenant's enjoyment of their unit and the fair things that they expected when they negotiated for the property. We'll go on to the next. Some other examples of maintenance-related conditions are things that are external to the unit itself. So these could be porches or dangerous walkways. Obviously, electrical problems could be in or out. Worn paint could be both on the inside or outside of the property, or outside of the building for the unit. Broken windows or doors, of course, and elevators. So there's a lot of different things that may be subject to a rent decrease petition. And we'll talk all about what the rent control remedy is when there are maintenance issues that are unaddressed. I would like to point out, too, that we have both market rate and long-term tenants, and the long-term tenants are those who moved in before January 1st, 1999, and their rents are tied to a 1978 rent. But we get these petitions from really both groups of people. You can imagine that newer tenants who moved in recently paying very high market rates expect things to be in really good order. So it's not just long-term tenants. It's really the full universe of rent-controlled tenants are filing petitions with us because they have expectations that things are going to be maintained. So I also mentioned that the rent control law requires the maintenance of base amenities. So these are things that are associated with the rent of the unit. But the base amenities are defined differently depending on when tenants moved in. So I just mentioned the long-term tenants. Those are people who moved in before January 1st, 1999. And for them, the base amenities are the housing services that were provided to the unit on April 10th of 1978. That was 1 year before the rent control law began. So owners of the properties at that time had to register their units, the rents for those units, and the amenities that came with that unit. So on file here at Rent Control are what we call the original registration forms. In most cases, owners complied with the requirement to provide the information, and we can provide a copy of that form to anyone who asks. And that form is considered to be an accurate reflection of what the amenities were on that date, although there could be other evidence that is presented to show that other amenities were also provided. So it's not an exhaustive list of what the amenities were. It includes, I think it generally carpets, drapes, screens, storage, furniture, parking, utilities if they were owner paid, stove, refrigerator, dishwasher, garbage disposal, laundry room, jacuzzi, and rec room. They said it's not an exhaustive list. Somebody who has lived in their unit since that time or has good evidence about what the amenities were could provide testimony, and that would be evaluated by a hearing officer in the context of a rent decrease petition. Since the amenities for pre-1999 or pre-2000 or 1999 tenants goes back to the 1978 amenities, it's possible that if you moved in before January 1st, 1999, that the amenities that you had when you moved in may not be the base amenities for the unit. So it's possible that on April 10th of 78, for example, the owner did not provide parking to the tenant. But if you moved in 1994 and your lease provided parking, well, that parking is part of your lease, but it's not considered a base amenity. So rent control would not have any remedy for you if that were taken away. You may have other legal remedies, but for us, we need to look at what was provided to the unit on April 10th of 1978. So most of the units in Santa Monica have been rented after January 1st, 1999. I think about 3/4 of them. So for tenants who moved in after January 1st, 1999, the required base amenities and housing services are those provided on the initial date of the tenancy. So when the tenant moved in and negotiated a certain amount of rent for the unit, all of the amenities that came with that rent are considered base amenities under the rent control law and do need to be maintained throughout the tenancy, or we can authorize a rent reduction. So there's also an additional amenity that can be added to a tenancy after January 1st, 1999, but they are limited. So the rent control law limits the additional amenities to parking, storage, or the right to have a pet. If a tenant and a landlord agree to an additional amenity, then that amount of rent for that amenity needs to be registered with us, and then it becomes a base amenity. So then tenants are required to pay for those additional amenities, and if they no longer want to pay for that, they should approach the rent control board upon possible decrease petition, and we can see about reducing that. But it does become a base amenity, and so owners can collect that amount going forward. So obviously we have some unit-specific base amenities, and again, these are things that you might expect: carpet, storage, appliance, drapes, parking. We have some common area base amenities like yards, patios, balconies, or play areas. So, if a tenant moved into a unit and had use of the yard, but later on the landlord came along and maybe put up a fence and said, no, this part of the yard is only to be used by the landlord himself or herself or another tenant, then the tenant who had that base amenity could petition the rent control board for rent reduction. Landscaping is even part of a base amenity. And, often we hear about landlords who may want to, I think it's xeriscape the yard, or maybe, change the landscaping so that it is water efficient. And really that's allowed. We would have to look at it on a case-by-case basis to see if there is a great reduction in the amenity. A lush landscape replaced by nothing but dirt, could be a reason for a rent reduction. Yard care services are also a common base amenity. So if the property enjoyed weekly yard care services and that were reduced, to monthly or none, that could be a reason for a rent reduction as well. Laundry facilities, recreational facilities, and what we're seeing sometimes is if owners are able to convert the laundry or recreational space into an accessory dwelling unit, then that would be a reduction in amenities for the tenants, and they could petition us for some rent reduction. So in addition to amenities, we also protect what we call housing services, and those are things like the right to roommates, on-site management, and owner-paid utilities. So if the tenancy, if its base amenity was, for example, 3 people in the unit, and then one of the tenants leaves, we consider it a base housing service to allow the tenant to replace the departed roommate on a one-for-one basis with proper notification to the landlord. If a landlord unreasonably refuses to allow a roommate, then the tenant could petition the rent control board, and the law specifies that any reduction would be the proportion of rent that third person paid. So it would be a 1/3 reduction in the rent. So tenants do have the right to replace roommates, really regardless of what is on their lease, but they do have to give notice to the owner in writing, and the owner cannot unreasonably refuse. I think it's 14 days the owner has to respond to the tenant. So on-site management is another one. Even if on-site management was not provided on the base rent date, so either 1978 or when the tenancy began, if it's a property of 16 units or more, then state law does require that there be on-site management, and we can reduce the rent if it's found that that is not being provided. Similarly, owner-paid utilities, if initially the owner was paying for, say, master metered electricity or gas or water, and then later installed separate meters for water, for example, then that would be a reduction in housing services, and it could be the reason for a rent reduction. So with that, I'll stop for our first set of questions, and let me see what we have heard. Okay, I think the first one I just answered. The question is, what is the law and or regulation regarding on-site property manager? Our building has 20 units, and we have not had an on-site manager since September. Our decades-long manager retired and moved. I asked because we had a pipe burst for the second time, and it took us 20 minutes to get the water off and 2.5 hours before the manager showed up. So as I said, state law does require for a property of 16 units or more to have an on-site property manager. You may want to inform management that that is the law. And if they don't make somebody the on-site manager, then you could give notice of that issue. And Micah, in a moment, is going to explain the process for beginning a petition for rent decrease when you have something like this happening, a base housing service that is no longer being provided. Okay, this one is, I contacted an attorney to create a sign-off letter to get permission in writing to allow me at my own expense to make repairs. Written permission is required by original lease to make repairs or improvements to apartment. I was following the protocols described by my original lease. Clearly, the landlord was ignoring my concerns expressed in my questions to them. This is a little bit difficult because it is it's a lease question, but it is true that if a tenant signed a lease that says that they will not make any, major changes to the unit without the landlord's written permission, then they should be getting the landlord's written permission. If that said, it is, as I pointed out in the beginning, the responsibility of the owner to repair anything that needs to be repaired. So if the owner is not responsive to a request for you to do your own maintenance at your own cost, then you could give notice, as Micah is going to describe, and possibly file a petition for rent decrease. And the owner could face a reduction in rent for not addressing that issue. Another part of that question is about asbestos. So asbestos is really something that is covered by the Air Quality Management District, not specifically by rent control or code enforcement, and questions regarding asbestos abatement really should be directed to AQMD. You can go to our website and look at, I think we have a community resource directory, and we have contact information for AQMD, or you can just Google them. All right. So here's a question about how about maintenance that is shoddy, like an uneven leveling out of a walkway crack, is repainting walkway included? If a petition were filed with us and the hearing officer found that there was a deteriorated condition, such as an uneven walkway or something like that, then the owner would have to request compliance with the hearing officer's decision when they made the repair. But if their repair was shoddy or insufficient or incomplete, then it's not likely that we would restore the rent. We would require that the owner complete the job in a good way to be able to get the rent restored. Okay, we have a question. We have been we have asked to replace our 35-year-old carpeting and 29-year-old paint, but get not with what you are paying from our manager. And again, it doesn't matter when you moved in or how much rent you're paying. Properties do need to be maintained. I would imagine that a carpet that is 35 years old probably has deteriorated to the point that if there were a petition with us, there could possibly be a rent reduction until that carpeting was replaced. Again, we'd have to look at what was the base housing service or base amenity for the unit on April 10th of 1978, but you could check with us to see if carpeting was a registered amenity. But the flooring would have to be kept in good condition. We have the question, can a petition for rent decrease be filed if someone is a community corporation tenant and CCSM doesn't do needed repairs? Yes, there's no difference between Community Corporation of Santa Monica, or which is an affordable housing provider, or any other property owner or landlord. Everybody is subject to the same law. Can you inspect the property periodically to evaluate repairs as an owner or tenant? Typically, I mean, I think what this is really asking is can an owner enter a unit to inspect for repairs, necessary repairs? Again, this is an issue of landlord entry that is covered by state law. Typically, owners can only enter for certain reasons, and that's generally limited to necessary or agreed upon repairs. So just an annual inspection just to inspect probably would not be lawful. But again, this is an issue of state law. So please refer to Civil Code Section 1954 on that. What if the garage is temporarily inaccessible due to an ADU being built out? If and how does this affect base rent? So if that is the reduction of a parking space for a tenant, that is possibly a reason for reduction. As Michael will explain, you would need to give notice, and an owner would have at least 30 days to respond. So it depends on how long the parking has been taken away. Is there a time limit by which carpet should be replaced? No, in Santa Monica, we don't have a specific number of years after which carpeting must be replaced. Some rent-controlled jurisdictions do have laws like that, but here it's really about the condition. So if the condition is poor after 3 years, I don't know if it's very poor carpeting, then it might need to be replaced. But 20 years, probably would need to be replaced. So is it possible or reasonable to request to share in the cost of replacing carpet and appliances? In order to get the quality replacements we'd prefer, we'd be willing to pay the cost difference. This is a difficult question to answer because I explained that for tenants who moved in after January 1st, 1999, separate agreements that would increase the rent are limited to parking, storage, and the right to have a pet. So, an increase in the rent could be a problem if it's to compensate the owner for upgraded amenities. If the tenant were to pay directly to the carpeting company or something like that, that would not be considered rent. So there are possible ways to work out something like that. And I'm going to just look at a couple more, and we have time for just a couple of more, and we'll have some more time for questions after the next segment. One of the questions has to do with the tenant causing holes in the walls, and would the owner have the right to basically take something out of the security deposit when the tenant vacates. The return of the security deposit is not covered by rent control law. It is covered by state law. So we'd refer you to the California Department of Consumer Affairs. There's a publication on our website on the homepage. It's the guide for landlords and tenants under California law. And there's a big section, there's like 10 pages there on what's allowed as a deduction from the security deposit. Okay. And we'll take just one more here. Termites, that's something you can certainly be a reason for a rent reduction under rent control law. The person is noting that the health department says it's not a health problem because they don't spread disease. That is the health department's call on that. But any kind of insect infestation, especially something that's recurring, could be a reason for a rent reduction under the rent control law. And then we have a question about evaluating. I said that the tenants can replace roommates on a one-for-one basis if they are base amenities to the unit. But the question is specifically about what kind of standards can the landlord have for the replacement roommate. This is getting into a question of reasonability because the law says that the owner cannot unreasonably refuse someone. So this is really a legal question, and owners should really consult an attorney to determine whether or not what they're doing is reasonable or unreasonable in terms of refusing a tenant. But I would point out that a replacement roommate doesn't necessarily have to be on the lease. They can just be a replacement roommate, and the tenants who originally signed the rental agreement are liable for the full rent. So even if somebody's credit rating wasn't so great, is that reasonable to refuse them? I don't know. The owner should still be able to collect the full rent from the named tenants. All right, with that, I will go on to the next section. Thank you for your questions. And this next section will be presented by Micah Michalski. And that is the remedies when there's a lack of maintenance. Micah?
Yeah, you can go ahead and go to the next slide there, Dan. Thank you.
And by the way, just so everybody knows, sometimes there's a slight delay in when the slides show up.
So we are talking about, in this section, the available remedies when there's a lack of maintenance from rent control's perspective. And the two remedies that we have in rent control are a petition for rent decrease and then a rent decrease for construction-related impact. Go ahead and next slide, please. So the first one I'm going to talk about today is the rent decrease petition. And a tenant may file a rent decrease petition when an owner does not make necessary repairs. A tenant may also file a decrease petition when amenities or housing services are no longer provided. An owner may also file a rent decrease petition requesting a rent decrease for removal of a base amenity or housing service. So if the landlord was going to remove a pool, for example, because they weren't able to maintain that anymore, or they needed to remove a parking spot because they were adding an ADU, they may go through this process to reduce the rent proactively rather than waiting for the tenant to file a petition. Next slide, please. So how does I think I was not expecting an animation there. Sorry about that. So how does a tenant file a rent decrease petition, and what's the process? Tenant makes a written request for repairs. Code enforcement order can also serve as the notice. Text messages do not meet the standard of written notice in California, so it would have to be either an email or a handwritten note, typed up note, letter, something like that. Fax machine, if that's still a usual way for you to communicate with your landlord. And the tenant must save an exact copy of the notice that they're providing to the landlord. They'll need that if and when they file the petition later. So the landlord then has 30 days to respond to the written notice to start working on the repairs to make things happen. And if after 30 days the tenant has not felt that their concerns have been addressed, then the tenant would file that decrease petition with rent control. Multiple notices are acceptable for filing a rent decrease petition if there are multiple issues that you're dealing with. Those notices cannot be older than 180 days, and the most recent notice has to be at least 30 days old to be included in the petition. Once that petition is filed with the rent control office, mediation would be scheduled. And if the matter is resolved in mediation, there would be a written settlement agreement, and that'd be signed by both sides, setting out what needs to be done. If any issues are not resolved by mediation, or mediation doesn't seem like it's going anywhere and either party wants to move forward to a hearing, then a hearing is held. The hearing officer would then issue a written decision on the needed maintenance. So going back to the carpet example, if the carpet appears to need to be replaced because it's however old and has had however much wear and tear on it, that would be included in the hearing officer's written decision. Both mediation and hearings are conducted by teleconference or video conference currently in the world that we're in, much like how we're doing these presentations this way. So keep that in mind. Both parties don't have to necessarily get into a room together at this point. We are trying to keep everybody safe and do it more conveniently by having it via teleconference. And then once the hearing officer has issued their written decision, if either party doesn't feel like it was a fair decision or has other concerns about it, they are able to appeal that decision to the rent control board, so the tenant or the landlord. Next slide, please. Regulation 4200, that's in Chapter 4 of the Rent Control Regulations, sets a decrease range for many possible issues. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is the most common issues that are faced when it comes to maintenance of a rent-controlled property, and it does set out the typical range. However, the hearing officer ultimately determines the amount of the decrease based on the degree of deterioration, the lack of maintenance, or limitation to a housing service or amenity. So this number can fluctuate a little bit outside of what's in the recommended range in the regulations, depending on case specifics. And then the decrease is going to remain in effect until the owner rectifies whatever the issue is and requests compliance. So going back to what Dan was saying, if the repair was insufficient, shoddy, not done well, then the landlord may not receive compliance, and they may need to try again. Or in some cases, the landlord may never seek compliance. So that is something that may happen, and the rent decrease may remain in effect in perpetuity until those issues are addressed, if and when those issues are addressed. Next slide, please. So the other remedy available is if the impacts are construction related. And this is a different process than the regular decrease petition. Rather than sending a notice to the landlord, like in the regular rent decrease petition, a tenant should notify rent control directly about the impacts that are happening, and the tenant should be prepared to provide as much detail as possible. This notification to rent control can be done through our email address, which is rentcontrol@santamonica.gov. Say that again, rentcontrol@santamonica.gov. And if tenants can include their name, their address, their unit number, impacts that they're facing as specific as possible. That'll give us the best opportunity to act on their concerns and send the landlord a notice about the construction-related impacts. We will try to schedule a mediation prior to petitions being filed, but each tenant that's impacted by the construction will need to file their own petition, and each petition is detail dependent. So each tenant that is impacted will have to provide as much detail about how they're facing impacts from the construction as possible. Next slide, please. How is a construction-related decrease decided? Decreases may be granted when a unit becomes uninhabitable due to the construction substantially reduces a housing service, construction interferes with a tenant's ability to occupy the unit as a residence. However, no decrease is authorized for unavoidable construction impacts caused by necessary repair and maintenance, unless construction is carried out in an unreasonable manner or the construction takes an unreasonably long time to complete. An example of necessary unavoidable repair and maintenance would be like the seismic retrofit program. The city is requiring that multifamily soft-story buildings and other buildings that may be impacted by earthquakes are retrofitted to be safe in case of an earthquake. That's a necessary repair, and as long as that's carried out in a reasonable manner and doesn't take an unreasonably long time to complete, no construction-related decrease would be awarded for seismic retrofit. Next slide, please. So also in Chapter 4, the construction-related rent decrease ranges are set forth in 4400, Section 4400. And unlike regular rent decreases where the decrease does not go back to when the impact was first felt by the tenant, but it goes back to the first month after the tenant submits the petition, potentially. Decreases for construction-related rent decreases are effective from the date the construction actually began. We do try to mediate. We have mediation services available, and we do try to mediate these construction problems as well as possible. We want to make sure that the landlord is aware of any impacts that they're creating on their tenants, and that we work to try to make that the impacts as limited as possible for the tenants when these required construction projects are happening. So some examples of rent decreases through construction-related rent decrease, the construction-related rent decrease petition include things like inadequate construction management. We can see a 10 to 75% reduction of rent. Safety issues could be a 10 to 100% reduction of rent. Loss of access to stairs, walkways, hallways. You can see $10 to $175 a month. Loss or reduction of yards, patios, balconies, play areas, landscaping. Sometimes if they're using that area as like a staging area, things like that you no longer have access, that could also be a $15 to $175 typical range. But again, these may be set by either the hearing officer or the board at a higher impact if it's found that the impacts are greater than a typical range would call for. And with that, I think we're ready to move on to questions that have to do with the two types of decrease petitions that we have here in rent control.
All right, thanks you, Micah. So if you've got your questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. We did have the question regarding renovation during earthquake retrofitting that's gone on with the renovation noise and for more than 5 months, and the loss of storage and parking during the earthquake mitigation. So again, the standard is it is the construction work necessary. First of all, that would be necessary construction work. And then the question is it being done in an unreasonable manner or an unreasonable time frame? Depending on the type of earthquake retrofit that is required, usually soft story, wouldn't be something that would typically take 5 months, as I understand it. So what I would encourage this person who has the question to do is to contact us and tell us more about their situation, and we can look at the specific fact pattern there, and possibly send a notice to the property owner that we are authorizing you to file a construction-related decrease petition. We had a question about where one can go to find the amounts for possible rent decreases. Again, for the standard decrease petition, that would be Regulation 4200. So it lists a number of the conditions and the range for a rent decrease. Again, like I said, it's possible for the hearing officer to go above or below that with good reason. We had another question about notifying the landlord if you're going to replace the carpeting on your own. One, it'd be best to check your lease to see if there are any limitations regarding that. But generally, yes. I mean, communication is important. So, imagine if you had property and it's different when you look at it next time. I think it's important to communicate whether your lease clearly says you can or can't, but communication is always a good thing. And then we had a question about an amenity that is on the lease but doesn't exist. This would be up to a hearing officer to determine, but if you contracted for a certain service and that service is not provided, then it's likely that we would determine that's a base amenity. It was on the lease. It was included in the rent dollar. And again, if you're not getting your full bag of chips, then that could be a reason for a rent reduction. Something that's on the lease that isn't provided also might be considered a breach of contract, and you could talk to an attorney about what remedies you might have legally. Okay.
And Dan, if I could just jump in real quick, I think people might not necessarily know where to find Chapter 4 or find specifically the Section 4200. So on our website, we do list all of the different, the charter amendment and the different chapters. We have that available through the left-hand side navigation on the page. And then we also pull out that section specifically that talks about the dollar amounts for the decrease petitions on the petition itself. So if you were to navigate to the decrease petition and take a look at that form, the typical dollar ranges are included in that form so that you can have an idea of what they would be unless a hearing officer decided that they needed to be outside of that range for good cause.
Thank you, Michael. That's a good point. And maybe you could answer this one as well. So the question is, does a decrease date back to when you file a decrease petition with rent control, or when you first notified your landlord of needing maintenance?
So the standard decrease petition, it would go into effect the first time that rent is due after the petition is turned in and accepted as complete with the rent control office. So for example, if a petition was turned in today, December 16th, and it was deemed complete and the process started, then potentially if a hearing officer awarded a reduction, then that would go back to January 1st, even though there probably would not be a hearing officer decision before January 1st. And then if it's a construction-related decrease, it can go all the way back to when the impacts were first felt and reported. So it's not with the regular rent decrease. It's not when you first notify your landlord and provide them notice that they need to provide this maintenance. It has to do with the filing date. With the construction-related decrease, it has to do with when the impacts are felt. Did I say that clearly enough, Dan?
Yeah.
I don't know if
I think you got it. Hopefully that was clear. I just point out that for notice, tenants have to give at least a 30-day notice to the landlord before they can file a petition for rent decrease. But they could also have a notice that is as much as 180 days old. So, we wouldn't go back to that six months earlier to provide the rent decrease. It's when you file the petition. That's when we start the clock. So we have a question, what to do if the landlord and the landlord's eviction attorney are not responding to problems of habitability with the intention of harassing a 35-year tenant who moved in the 80s and is now 65 years old, leave tenancy so landlord can bring to get a market rate rent. If you feel that the owner's reduction in amenities are not addressing your habitability issues, are intended to get you to leave, then we strongly encourage you to contact the city attorney's office. That's 310-458-8336, and talk to them about a harassment complaint. If there are issues of habitability, they may work with code enforcement to take a look at the property and ensure that the property is being maintained in a habitable way. See what else do we have here? If construction is temporarily halted due to lack of permits, can tenants file decrease petitions retroactively for construction done in prior months before the stoppage? I'll attempt to answer this, but I think if you're talking about an owner who's doing construction for which they did not have permits and therefore had to stop, then it seems to me that that would be work that was being done in an unreasonable manner. And so it may be possible to file a construction-related decrease petition about that. Again, I would encourage this person to contact our office and speak with Michael or one of the other information coordinators who will be able to look at that situation a little bit more specifically. Somebody had the question about regarding carpet again, and the question was who decides if the carpet is habitable. Well, that's really not an issue of habitability, but does it need to be replaced? This person says that the manager says it looks fine, but after 19 years, we know that the padding is dust. This is something that would be case specific, but that sounds like something. If you believe that your unit is not being maintained, you can always give a notice to the landlord. And if the landlord disagrees or there's a dispute, then you could file a petition for rent decrease with us, and we would look at it and have a determination. I mean, it may be that the hearing officer determines that the carpet is just fine, or the hearing officer may determine that no, that it's substandard and it should be replaced. One of the things that Micah pointed out, which is more important than you think, or you may think, is the role of mediation. So all of our petitions, whether they be decrease petitions or construction-related decrease petitions or excess rent petitions, I'll go to mediation first. And most of the time, the rates are slightly different depending on the type of petition, but most of the time, our mediator is able to work out a solution for both sides. So most of the petitions that are filed never get to hearing because we're able to mediate. And again, we really emphasize the importance of understanding and communication. And I see some question that's regarding water usage during the drought. Penalties are on the landlord. It has no control over the tenant's water usage. That's certainly a responsibility of everybody to try to reduce our water usage during the drought. Hopefully this week's rains will make things a little bit better. But it isn't a rent control process or code enforcement sort of thing. You may want to contact the city's water department. I believe that there may be some remedy if tenants are using excess water. I don't recall what the regulation is. All right, with that, we will go on to the code enforcement section of this presentation, and I'll turn it over to Maurice.
Good morning. My name is Maurice Cochet. I'm one of two code enforcement supervisors here within the city of Santa Monica. And today I will be explaining what we do, how we do things, and what we focus on in the hopes that you get a better understanding of what code enforcement do respectively. Next slide. So code enforcement was created as a division in the city of Santa Monica in 2011 to meet the growing demand of code enforcement calls for services. Those calls for services include deteriorated housing conditions, which in Santa Monica, 85% of housing in Santa Monica is multifamily. Construction work without permits, which is a large part of our calls for service. Zoning violations, building code violations, and other Santa Monica code violations. We enforce the majority of the Santa Monica Municipal Code, and in order to manage the complaints and organize the workload and response, we have categorized the type of complaints into 10 different programs. And those programs are building and safety related calls, tenant harassment, public nuisances, property maintenance, zoning violations, regulated business activities, violations related to sustainability, public works violations, short-term rentals, and shared mobility device enforcement. And just recently, between March 2020 and June of 2021, code enforcement was reassigned to the Emergency Operations Center, responsible for enforcement of the state, county, and city's COVID emergency orders. So, and during that time, code enforcement, we only responded to life safety type of complaints. And so just recently in June of this year, we went back to doing our normal code enforcement duties. Next slide. So just to give you like an overview of a required maintenance, property owners must maintain housing according to minimum standards set by the California Building Codes, California Health and Safety Codes, and the Santa Monica Municipal Codes. The California Building Code tells us how a structure must be legally constructed. They are the set of rules that specify the standards of construction to protect public health and safety and general welfare. The California Health and Safety Codes is our California state law governing various subject areas of health and safety, including regulation of buildings used for human habitation, also known as our state housing law. And the Santa Monica Municipal Code also covers various subject areas that either regulate or prohibit certain activities. Together, these are three codes that these three codes set minimum standards to protect you, the occupant. Next slide. Common areas. Common areas is the area which is available for use by all tenants or groups of tenants. Common areas include accessory structures such as garages and storage rooms, carports and parking areas, laundry facilities, swimming pools, gates and fences, exterior electrical, mechanical, and plumbing fixtures located in common areas. As a rule of thumb, all these things that were built with a permit to code must also be properly maintained. If it's going to be removed, it must be removed by way of building permit. Next slide. Earlier, I had mentioned the California Building Code and how it tells us how building structures must legally be constructed. The building code tells us that a building structure must have exterior weatherproofing such as stucco and siding, roof, stairs, handrails, and landings built a specific way to ensure you can enter and exit safely. Entryways and overhangs constructed in a specific manner, and exterior electrical, mechanical, and plumbing fixtures attached to the building. Buildings must have all of these things at minimum to protect public health, safety, and general welfare of the occupant. Next slide. Some building code violations is work without permit when a owner or someone does work on a building and when it requires a permit, but then they do not go out and get the permit. Construction hours here in the city, construction hours are between 8 and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 8 and 5, 8 and 5, wait, 8 and 6 between 8 and 6 Monday through Friday, and 9 to 5 on Saturdays, and then there's no construction work allowed on Sundays. So early morning construction, after hours construction is not required unless a contractor or a owner applies for a after hours permit. Construction related work, which could include enforcing like the means and methods plans, which is required when construction work is being conducted and it impacts a tenant. Bootleg units. Bootleg units is when owner takes a garage or a shed and converts it into a residential unit without permits. Residential substandard housing, dangerous buildings, and we also go out to noise complaints when construction can get so loud as to disturb neighboring properties, or including the tenants on the property where they're conducting construction. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about habitability unit interiors. A habitable dwelling unit correctly provides basic protection, sanitation facilities, and access to utilities such as gas, water, and electricity. An uninhabitable unit is an unfit to live unit due to conditions that exist that endangers the life, limb, health, property, safety, and welfare of the public or the occupant. The building official determines habitability when a tenant-occupied unit is rendered uninhabitable by the building official. The landlord is required to provide temporary relocation benefits to all affected tenants. And I will be getting into the relocation process in a little bit. Next slide. Priority of our cases filed with code enforcement. So we prioritize our cases in 3 to 4 different ways. One being the life safety issues, which are emergency. One being emergencies, which we need to go out right away and handle the cases because like a building could be deteriorated to the point where it could collapse. That's when we will need to go out immediately just to assess the situation with building and safety and make sure that if there's any tenants, they will need to be relocated out of the building or the unit. But we prioritize our cases. Is priority one complaints are responded to the same day. So, example, something that happens where a building or unit is unsafe, tenant or tenants are displaced. Priority two complaints, we go out within 3 days. Those are nuisances such as noise and early morning construction. Priority three complaints, we go out within 4 days, and those are zoning code violations. Priority four complaints, we will go out within 5 days, such as regulated businesses, people operating businesses without a license. Due to our current staffing levels and recent return to code, due to the recent return of code officers from COVID-19 enforcement, the response times will be delayed. Next slide. Our goal is to gain voluntary compliance when possible and to avoid escalated enforcement action. But our process it stems from a complaint or if a officer sees a violation out in the field, and then our process is to inspect the property or the unit just to make sure that there is a violation. And if a violation is determined to be there, then we will go to our next step, which is a notice of violation. Notice of violation is just a warning to the property owner or to the violator that there's a violation of the municipal code or the building code, and it needs to be remedied within a certain amount of time. If the violation is not remedied or abated, then we will go to our next step, which is an administrative citation. And as the violation is not corrected, we would further our enforcement by referring it to the city attorney's office for further prosecution, which could include additional fines and penalties, administrative hearing before a hearing officer, criminal or civil prosecution, recording a lien on the property, or a court order receivership or relief. Next slide. We do conduct habitability determinations in conjunction with the building department, and that's oversaw by the building official. Habitability determinations are made by the building official on a case-by-case basis. Possible reasons, any building or portion of building which creates conditions that endanger the life, limb, health, and property, safety, and welfare of the public or occupants, which could include inadequate sanitation, substandard dangerous wiring, plumbing, or mechanical fixtures, or structural hazards, lack of proper egress from the unit or property, lack of improper toilets, sinks, bathtubs, showers, hot and cold running water, and then as of now that we're getting to the winter months, the lack of heat, which is a big one, and mold as well. Next slide. When we go out to do our habitability determinations and the unit is determined to be uninhabitable, we do what's called a relocation order. And it's situations where temporary relocation benefits must be provided to the tenants. And when we do the relocation order, the tenant has the choice on whether or not they want to relocate or not. But the owner has the responsibility for the relocation. So it's the owner's responsibility of what type of benefit the owner would get. I mean, the tenant would get, whether it's a relocation to a hotel, motel, whether it's paying the actual daily per diem rates, which I will get into in a little bit, or whether it's putting them up in a comparable housing unit that the owner may already own. And then there's one other thing as well, which is the tenant and the landlord can come up with their own separate agreement outside of what we require, as long as both the owner and the tenant agrees to it, and both parties know what their rights are. And just to give an example of some of the situations where tenant relocation may be required termite fumigation, construction work that requires the tenant to temporarily vacate, building code violations where the city orders the tenant to vacate, the unit is declared uninhabitable due to a fire, uh, and benefits not required if condition is caused by the tenant or the tenant's guest. So it's very important that when we investigate whether a unit is habitable or uninhabitable, we see is the tenant the cause of the condition? If so, then the tenant is not obligated to receive the temporary relocation benefit. Next slide. So temporary relocation benefit amounts. So if it's less than 5 days, if the tenant has to be relocated less than 5 days, the owner can relocate the tenant to a hotel, motel, or give them the actual per diem rate, which I will go over in a second. And if it's more than 5 days, but less than 30 days, the landlord is required to either provide comparable housing or a daily per diem rate. If it's 30 days or more, it's a comparable housing or a weekly per diem rate. And what those rates are, the daily per diem rate is $327 for the family, for a hotel, for them to find a place like a hotel or motel. $35 for meal per diem per person. $1 for laundry, and then $59 for pet accommodations for a dog, and $32 per day for pet accommodations for a cat. And now the pet accommodations is a little bit different because that's a reimbursement. The tenant has to put up the animal and pay their fee, and then once they get the receipt or the invoice and then pay and then get the receipt, then they have to bring it to the owner, and the owner has to reimburse them. But that's the only time that there's like a reimbursement. And then during the time of relocation, the tenant has to continue to pay the rent during that time of relocation. It's very important that they continue to pay rent. And the tenant is entitled to return to the unit at the same rent rate. So the owner can't raise the rent because of a condition that was caused, and then it caused the tenant to be relocated. Next slide. Oh, and any questions?
All right, thank you, Maurice. Let's see if we have any questions here for you specifically. I don't know if this is a code enforcement issue, but the question is it considered normal to have mold in the bathroom on or near the shower tiles, especially if the tenant does not clean or open the window? Is that something you can answer?
Yes, I can answer that. The state says that, okay, there's mold everywhere, and then especially in areas where there's moisture, and then that's in the bathroom. What the state calls that is minor mold. When there's small areas where like there's mold, like around the shower ring, or like around areas where it gets wet. When it's minor mold, the tenant is responsible for cleaning that. it's not the owner's responsibility. But when it's major mold, when the mold is really out of control, where it's all over the place, then that's when we can step in and try to address that issue.
Yeah, I think that's good. Mold is a really difficult question, and we get it often, especially after it rains, like Morty said. Mold is not supposed to be growing on surfaces that are not designed to get wet, but anywhere around a shower or anything like that, that's affected. And but where you have mold, appearing on bedroom walls or
Wow.
things like that, those could be bigger issues of plumbing leaks or maybe leaks from the roof that should be addressed. Um, uh, we at rent control can that is a reason for a rent reduction, but again, you have to give notice and wait at least 30 days before you can file a petition. And if you clean the mold up yourself, then the condition no longer exists. So it's difficult for us. One other resource here, and I'll introduce them in a minute, is the housing. I mean, sorry, the health department, the public health department, and we understand they can inspect, and if there's visible mold in places where it's not supposed to be growing, or not expected to be growing, then they can cite the owner.
Yes, but can I say one other thing?
Please, yeah.
Uh, when there's a mold complaint, the state law states that the owner has to be contacted, has to be notified by the tenant. So the tenant has to give the owner reasonable, they have to notify the owner that like they have mold, and then the owner has to have opportunity to remedy the situation. Uh, that's one of a couple of situations where the tenant has to notify the owner prior to calling us or calling maybe the health department is when there's mold. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, thanks for that. And I think that's, again, that speaks to good communication. You want to be communicating, and if there is a wider issue, you certainly want to let your landlord know about it so that they can look into it. I'm sure they want to protect their building and want to address any roofs, leaks from the roof or something like that. So again, communication always good. Let's see. We have the question, are construction permits made public, published, or available upon request from code enforcement?
No, not from code enforcement. Construction permits, actually, they should be posted at the property where there's construction being done. Also, if you go online to our website, under the Building and Safeties webpage, you can look up to see which addresses have permits. And if you want to get additional information, you can do a public records request, or you can request information from the Building and Safety Department regarding the permits themselves.
Okay, thanks. And another question is, how do you report unpermitted work?
Oh, just call code enforcement. Our main number is 310-458-4984, or you can use our 311 system. You can report it through our 311 system, either online or by phone, and then also by email as well at code.enforcement@santamonica.gov.
Okay, great. I think you answered this, but maybe they didn't catch it. For relocation, who determines if it is a per diem or a hotel, the tenant or the landlord?
The landlord determines what type of benefit the tenant will get. So the landlord would decide on whether they want to put them up in a hotel or pay the actual daily per diem rate, or want to do comparable housing. Want to put them up in comparable housing. How about that?
Okay, and person had several questions. The first was about the an advertised pool and jacuzzi that has been out of order for repairs, maybe out of order for many more months. Is that a reason for rent reduction? That does appear to me something that if it was a base amenity, so it was available when you moved in or you contracted for it and it's not being provided, then you can give notice to your landlord that you want that restored. Keep a copy of your notice, and then after 30 days, file a petition with us. And if the condition still exists, and it's possible that you could get a rent reduction for that amenity. They're also asking about a rusty old tub, hole in the wall, new curtains. Again, is the owner responsible for a repair or replacement of these? If something is not being maintained in a good way, again, you give notice to the landlord. Either they're going to address those issues or dispute them. If they dispute them, you can file a petition with us. Hopefully we can mediate that situation and get a resolution. And then he had a relocation question, which is he was relocated to a hotel months ago for painting and carpeting, and they paid $35 per day for meals. And the question is, did you say they should pay $300 for a family?
Okay, if a tenant is relocated to a hotel, they don't get the daily per diem, which is the 327. But they would get the meal per diem, which is the $35 per person per day. It's either you're going to be relocated to a hotel, motel, or you're going to get paid the money, which is the 327.
Okay, great. We do have a question about entry by the landlord and the owner giving notice by text. This is a state law issue. Again, we're trying not to get into these, but my understanding, just as with a notice for a rent decrease, text does not constitute proper notice. So you may want to check state law on that issue specifically. Our building permits, let's see. Are building permits approved if the work is not being done by a licensed contractor not being done by a licensed contractor?
Well, that's actually a question for building and safety. But if a permit is obtained, they will check to see if the contractor is a licensed contractor. But then also you have permits that can be obtained by owners. So owner builder, an owner may not be a contractor, but they can obtain the permit and then hire someone, so that they'll act as a contractor and subcontract out the work. But for further details, what I would say is to contact building and safety, because they're the ones that would do the inspections and ultimately approve and finalize the permits and the work.
Okay, and then looks like we have just one more question. Given that tenants are required to communicate issues in writing to the owner to begin the rent decrease petition process, is the management company required to provide a written contact method or info? Our management company has been reluctant to communicate by any means other than phone. In order to file the decrease petition, yes, you do need to communicate with the owner in writing. We would accept a letter addressed to the management company or owner. If that has not been provided to you, proper registration under the rent control law requires that an address be on file here. So you could contact our office and we could give you the mailing address for the owner of your property. You do not need to send written, like a letter by certified mail or return receipt. You can just send it by regular mail. You will be required to file a proof of service, and we'll accept that the owner received the received the notice. One last question we'll take is, if the tenant is destructive and ruins the carpet or drapes, is the owner still responsible to maintain? Well, as we said, owners are required to maintain the units in good condition. But if the tenant caused the problem and you believe that's the case, then you're certainly within your rights to give the bill to the tenant, and either they're going to pay or not pay. If they don't pay, you can go to small claims court and ask for a judgment there to get compensated. All right, with that, we will go on to the last section of our presentation. And this is just a general note about interagency responses. So, when you call us or if you call code enforcement, it may not be that your specific issue is addressed by either one of our agencies. And certainly if it is, we'll help you. But if not, don't be surprised if you get referred to somewhere else. It's not that we're trying to pass the buck or anything like that. It's just that different agencies have different responsibilities. So we also want you to know that code enforcement and rent control work cooperatively to address maintenance inquiries and to ensure violations are abated. As Micah noted, if code enforcement comes out and issues a citation or a notice, sorry, I'm not using the right word, I'm sure, Maurice, but you can use code enforcement's notice to the landlord just as if it were your own notice to the landlord. You will be required to get a proof of service from the code enforcement officer who issued that to file your petition, because we need to always have the proof of service also. And if there are unabated code enforcement orders for a unit or for common areas, that can actually cause the general adjustments that rent control normally allows to be blocked. And if we do block it, that's going to continue until that issue is abated, and then we will restore all of the rent that was blocked going forward. So you would qualify for general adjustments going forward from the time that it was abated. For really serious code violations that go unabated for a long time and the tenant ends up leaving, under state law, an owner is prohibited from actually setting a market rate rent for that new tenancy, because they basically drove the tenant out by failing to address the serious code violations. I mentioned earlier the Public Health Department. They do have people who are dedicated to Santa Monica, and as I said in the beginning, there are many agencies involved with the landlord-tenant relationship, and the health department covers things like vermin infestations, plumbing, electrical, toilet issues, or sewage overruns, sinks, showers, baths, heating, appliances, lighting, sanitation, some structural issues, mold too. So it's good to really contact all the relevant agencies when you have an issue. The last thing I wanted to talk about is there are some changes going on with the city right now, in that we are transitioning from the smgov.net website or domain name to santamonica.gov. Santamonica.gov actually launched October of 2020, but we've been in a process of moving the content over to the new website. And beginning January 3rd, the old smgov.net site is going to be shut down. So if you have bookmarks or you're used to reaching us there at smgov.net, you will not get there. So you're going to have to look at santamonica.gov. And this is really the first phase of a lot of ongoing updates and enhancements. There will be a few pieces that were on smgov.net that will continue to be available to you because the technical solutions haven't been worked out on the santamonica.gov side. That is the boards and commissions. So if you want to see our rent control board videos or agendas, that will still be available to you. The look up a rent feature that is on our website now, so you can go type in the address of any unit or any address in Santa Monica, and if it's a rent controlled unit, you'll see what the maximum allowable rent is, and if it's a tenancy that began after January 1st, 1999, what the start date was for that rent, and then the unit size. We also have a rent control document portal. So all of our documents since 2005 have been scanned and are publicly available. You can just go in and look up any address, and you can search by document year or type, and you can print out any of our documents. They're all public records. So those will continue. And then, what is this new santamonica.gov all about? So the idea was really to enhance the search functionality to make it easier to find information across city web pages and domain names. An issue like harassment, for example, you might not know if that's something that rent control handles or code enforcement or the city attorney's office. And just by searching, you should be directed to the right department that covers that issue. The new website is going to be fully accessible, ADA compliant. Going to have a kind of integrated design, so all of the city's departments have kind of one look. And it's also going to be friendly across different device platforms, so tablets or phones. What it means is, our old site is going away, so our colorful rent control board site on the left there is going to be replaced by this new look. We're doing all we can to make sure that all the information that we've been providing will continue to be available on the new site. In the near term, it's been beneficial because we've been able to reduce from 50,000 pages and 60 unique domain names to fewer than 2,000 and just the one unique domain, santamonica.gov. And already we're seeing that people stay on the site a little bit longer and don't bounce out from not finding the information that they wanted. And lastly, we at Rent Control have been working on a replacement of our legacy rent tracking database. It's written in COBOL and has been around almost as long as Rent Control has been around, 40 years. So it's time for something new, and we are launching the final stage of this information information system enhancement. Along with those look up a rent features that I mentioned, the online document portal. So we're now going to be introducing a web-based system for tenants and landlords to file petitions with us, any registration forms, tenancy registration forms, virtually everything that we do here, you'll be able to file online. We think that's going to be great, especially for owners who maybe rent a unit and they have to register the tenancy. They can do it on their phone. So just like the new website, it's going to be mobile friendly. And the user accounts are free, of course. And we just ask that you send us an email at rent2020@santamonica.gov, and we'll set you up with an account. This will probably not be until sometime in the spring when we finalize this. If you're a landlord and you've already sent us your request with the properties that you own, we have all that information and we'll be getting back in touch with you. It's been a long long haul to get this up and running, but we think it's going to be a great service enhancement for everybody. Lastly, just some contact information. Rent Control answers the phone at 310-458-8751. Email is another great way to reach us. We monitor our email box and respond usually within the day, if not within the hour. Code enforcement's information is here, 310-458-4984. Not sure if this is probably a good website address, but again, when you get to santamonica.gov, just go over to community development and you'll find the code enforcement pages there. And with that, I just want to thank everybody for coming. We really appreciate your attention for the last hour and 45 minutes. Hopefully it was useful to you, and just know that we're always here. So if you have further questions, please just call us, contact us somehow. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.